Great, and we're live. Welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. Very exciting today. I have Nicole Le Maire on the line. And Nicole, you are a global people advisor at thepeopleengine.me. And at the moment, you're in the Netherlands, but that is not often the case. You're usually on the road. So we're going to talk about that. First question. What does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
There are a variety of things I use for my virtual office. I always have my computer, my laptop, my tablet, my phone, mobile. Then I have my banners with me just to help create a good setting for wherever I'm working at. And I'm usually located 3 to 6 months in a different country around the world. So it's really dependent on where I'm at the time, what I need to bring with me as well.
So when you say banners, are you talking about the two banners that are behind you right now?
Indeed, yes. And I'm looking at some new options as well. There's some really nice new wall painting things you can switch on as well. So I'm looking at implementing those as well in my locations wherever I am.
Interesting. So tell us about the locations where you've been and how you choose your next location.
It really depends on the work I'm getting as well. At the moment, I'm looking going back to Asia, mainly because a lot of the clients are there, and it's nice to pop in once in a while in their office and you're Nicole, and meet up in real life. So I'm depending on the clients, but I've been all over the place. I've been in all the places in the Middle East, all across Europe, parts of Asia, the US. So it's really like remote work, digital nomad style, but not so much from a sandy beach type of offer, much more from how can I help the client, in which location are they, and then possibly go there or close to there and once in a while meet up.
So being on the road like that, so it's nice. You get to stay in a particular location for 3 to 6 months. That gives you a chance to really know each location, I can imagine. What have you learned about working like this? Because you have to set up your virtual office wherever you are, and it's probably different in different parts of the world. I mean, what have you learned from doing this?
You become a lot more flexible. You always have work that you can do without a Wi-Fi connection. So always have something else to work on if Wi-Fi fails, so you don't get frustrated that day. Also have the expectations with the people you're working with that you might drop off anytime. And I love your flashcards, and there should be one dropping off, connection going bad or something like that. With that as well. So it really depends on the locations, and usually in the locations you least expect it, you have the best network and the best communication setup. So that's, I think, what I love about working this way. And I'm not talking about like co-working spaces, because sometimes it's not always the best to be in a co-working space from various obvious reasons. I like to, rent a house or an apartment and do everything from there, from my setup wise.
Right. So does the Wi-Fi vary a lot really from place to place, or is it starting to get better? I mean, is it starting to be like good Wi-Fi everywhere? No? Okay. Oh no.
No, not at all. And I travel with my own Wi-Fi connection as well, but that's just for downloading emails. And also on on your phone, it does work and it doesn't work. So you have to jump constantly between different devices with different networks, which is great. But I think, always have something with you to work on. Otherwise, you just go totally frustrated with everything.
Yeah, it sounds like one would have to have a lot of patience to work this way, because all kinds of weird things must come up while you're on the road. What about culture? What do you run into? I mean, now you've traveled, I mean, Asia and the Middle East and the US, I mean, those are very different cultures. What do you experience when you're working? Do people think what you're doing is weird, or is it just totally normal now?
It's totally weird, and especially a female working this way, and not only digital nomad style. I'm in an apartment or a house for 3 months or 6 months, and they're thinking, whatever is this this lady doing, coming with their banners, etc. But it really depends on the culture of the people. Usually, they're pretty curious and pretty interested, and they're very supportive. So I've had instances where my Wi-Fi wouldn't work, and then I would go to the neighbor and they would allow me to work in their their living room. And when I have my banners up, or when I'm talking to clients, they're so interested. I get cups of coffee and cookies, etc. They take care of you. So from that aspect, it's a totally different work aspect. It doesn't have to be lonely or solopreneurial. I have my team I work with everywhere. So there's constant interaction, and people can do it, and it doesn't have to be party style, digital nomad style. It can be proper remote work, what I saw proper in terms of long term, and still able to really add value as well.
Yeah, it sounds incredible what you're doing. I really like the 3 to 6 months too, because I know with digital nomads, for myself personally, being on the road so much, from hopping from place to place a lot, really would throw me off. I really need to be somewhere for a while and just like settle in. But I mean, that's why everybody gets to choose what they like the best. That's the best part of it all.
Well, exactly, and I do a lot of the house sitting as well. So people, want me to come to to the house and wherever the country is. And after a while, you build a network. And if consultants in a certain country, go on holiday or have work abroad, they ask me to house sit their house. So, that's another way of really learning and integrating in a community, and then learning about the place and the culture, the food, etc. Yeah.
That is lovely. I love that idea. The whole idea of building a global network where you're welcome in many people's homes all over the world. It sounds amazing. Okay, so go ahead. I cut you off.
Well, there's definitely, it's amazing and it's fun, but of course there's always, what you say, the stress of moving, of picking up your stuff, is Wi-Fi happening or not? So you do need, if you do this, you need to be realistic with your 2 feet on the ground to make it happen.
Did you start out realistic, or did you grow into being more realistic?
A little bit of both. I've always traveled for my role around the world as well, and in the corporate world when I was working. So I never actually sat in one place for very long, and I think that has a lot to do with the style of work I like now as well.
Interesting. Well, I really want to talk about the People Engine. So your website is thepeopleengine.me, so People Engine Me, and you're a global people advisor supporting this new world of work. What does that mean? What does the People Engine do?
We do a variety of things. So I just received a request to do some hiring in Dubai. I'm supporting a company with my team in Pakistan. We're working with some people in Italy at the moment on a variety of startup work of helping to set up the HR from a remote work perspective. So what you look at from a team perspective, I look at from a particular HR perspective. So with another company in Australia, I'm working to make sure that they're legally viable from digital nomads. The people they hire, do they actually, pay their taxes, or are they actually, working in a different way? So I and my team we do different things, and I like to keep it that way. I don't want to only focus on recruiting. I don't want to focus only on people operations and HR. I like to do a variety of things because that's what I'm best at.
Wow. And what do companies, what is something like what are the first or the basics that companies need to look at when they're thinking about their HR and setting up for remote teams? I mean, there must be some common mistakes that people make.
Oh, it's highly interesting, and I'm not talking. I'm leaving the team setups and the technology aside, but hiring people as an online business remotely is very easy on one side, but to get quality people is going to be a lot harder to find. And people who want to work remotely and looking at the diversity of the people you have in your team. And I think that's what online businesses are great at, looking at all types of people. And the challenges are they're setting it up an online business. It runs like mad. There are 20, 30, 40, 50 people. And then at once they realize, well, are we compliant? Or, how are we onboarding our people? Do people actually understand how it was when we started, when we were with 2 or 3 or 4 in the garage or somewhere else? So I think those are the challenges. We come in and we look at the overall setup from a HR perspective, and then we move on and we structure and we plan and inputting frameworks that work, and then we leave them usually to it. So I'm all for HR, but at some point the business needs to either hire somebody in the company themselves, or they need to spread it out and become HR entrepreneurs themselves. And that's what I really look at, self-sufficiency from the HR perspective.
So you come in and you put the processes and the framework in place, and then you say, okay, guys, run with it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Call me when things blow up. I'll be back to fix it again. Wow.
I think I think that's why they built their online businesses. They didn't build it to have procedures and legal frameworks and the traditional old-fashioned HR. You have to wear this. This is how you have to look behind the computer. We expect you to be there from 9 to 5. And there's a lot of online businesses that do work that way, and it's just wrong. To be honest, it just doesn't match up whatsoever. So when we come in, it's really looking at what's currently in place. What is your overall goal with your business? What was when you initially thought about it? How did you set it up? And don't let it change because you're hiring from people from Asia or the Middle East or America. Make sure you keep that cultural value and move it on.
Wow. So I'm surprised to hear that online businesses are still trying to conform to the in-person norms, which is really interesting. Yeah. That is really interesting because it is a totally new way of working, but it's interesting that they're taking what they know from the office and placing it directly into the online world, and it's not working. So why doesn't the 9 to 5 work?
I think people have different preferences from if you're possibly a morning person or afternoon person, time zones, if you work across the world, some mornings, I'm working very early, some evenings I'm working very late. You need to calculate that in how you set up your team, but also your processes. And when you hire a person from Asia, are you looking at paying equal to somebody from the US, for example? These things are coming into play as well, and do you want that or not for your team? So these are things that do need to be looked at, especially if a business is growing over 20 people.
Is that the magic number? Like if it's more than 20 people, you start to need to have HR processes in place?
Yes, you start losing out on the culture you previously wanted it to be. Because there's so many different attitudes, cultures, thinking from people, and everybody wants to have their say. And it's very difficult for owners to then, keep on to this is what I wanted to have, and this is how I wanted it to be. And then we come in with, for example, tools, processes, etc. But flexible ones you can't have. old-fashioned ways of working.
Yeah, those big old rule books that we used to get as new employees, that's a dinosaur thing now. It's an archive. Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. So I was going to ask, I lost my train of thought thinking about all the dinosaurs. Speaking of dinosaurs, where does the resistance come from when you're going into these companies? Who resists the most the changes that you want to put in place?
The people coming straight from a corporate way of working. The people that have worked this way, whether they have been consultants for a long time or just coming into the workforce, from a remote work perspective, they're pretty flexible. But people are wanting to be freelancers or independent contractors moving into the remote world work. It's very difficult for them. It's a totally different mindset. The ways of working, the ways of interacting, it's just a learning curve for many of them.
Interesting. Okay, so it's people coming from the corporations, the corporate side, that are struggling when they have to go to the more remote side because it is such a different way of working. Indeed.
Exactly. So the way we communicate together now, this is what we do on a daily basis, and this is how we help people. But when you come from a corporate, you're used to the water cooler conversation, but we have a e-cup, and we have a chat. But that water cooler needs to be built into your organization if you want to have something like that. And for many individuals, it is difficult. It's doable, but it's very difficult.
Interesting. I love the e-cup as the water cooler. I call it virtual coffee, but I like that, the e-cup of coffee. Indeed. So what are some of the processes and frameworks? Give us an idea of some of the things that you set up for people just to get a picture.
So when we look at, I'll take one of the companies I'm working with at the moment for an example. They're looking at implementing performance management. And we're not talking about appraisals, but we're looking at actually, what are their ratings? How much are they getting done on their projects? Is it on time? And these type of things. So you're taking a little bit of how it used to be and then implementing it. Okay, how we actually put the data analytics on that, and how effective is this person with the project they're on? And then if they're less effective, how can we make sure that this person keeps productive and finding new ways of keeping the productivity on? And that can be with tools or apps, or can just be, coaching the employee through a new way of work, a new way of doing the project.
Do you find one of the things that I hear from companies or from a lot of remote teams is that they're sort of thrown into being remote teams, but they don't get any training? Is that also what you hear?
Yes, well, everybody starts to work remotely, and there are training courses to work remotely, but it's a different mindset, and putting all these people together without proper remote experience in terms of how do we communicate online, what are the yes and the no's, what we can do and what we can't say, is very difficult. So I totally believe that they're just getting chucked in there. And for me, it was the same so many years ago, when I was in the corporate workforce. Well, Nicole, you go off and you travel the world and you look at all the headquarters and all the branches in Africa, not telling there were 52 branches. These type of things you find out when you're on the ground. So I think that's the difference is it requires swimming a lot. And I think there is a way of using the training and the teams together. But I think a lot comes down to individual requirements and how the person likes to work as well.
Why are the companies that you're working with, why are they starting to go remote? What are some of the reasons that they're doing that? Because they could stay the way they are, I'm assuming.
Many could. Some of the online startups, they're based online. I think, first of all, a cost perspective, but also a lot of people want to work remotely now. And it gives opportunities to the diversified and inclusion workforce. So you're looking at, I have dyslexia, you're looking at people that might be able to work better remotely and be able to work, for mothers between certain hours to pick up their kids. And I think it's a requirement that we're working towards of society and the community. But there's a big but. There's a lot of companies that don't want it and will not want it. And the dinosaur effect is still very relevant. And also for people like myself, people, coming in from a marketing or finance perspective, from a modern HR perspective, trying to help these companies. And it's sometimes very difficult to move this old traditional mindset forward. And then you have the big corporate software companies that, yes, we're working remotely and we're implementing this system and we're doing this and we're doing that. And we're working with these clients, but not thinking about the smaller clients that might not be ready for all what they're producing. So you're getting a real split in terms of people working remotely and people working the traditional way, which is nothing wrong with it if it works for the company. But then you get a mind shift of you have to do it. And people and companies have to be ready for it.
Oh, wow. So there's actually like a divide happening right now with there's people that are like shooting ahead with the remote working and others that don't want it, but then the tools are being developed for it. And probably the millennials coming in are wanting it more and more. I mean, a lot of them don't want to be stuck in an office. I call them day prisons myself. But I'm super biased, of course, because I love the remote world. Why don't companies want to embrace the remote? What are they afraid of? What don't they want?
Well, I think, it's some of the things that have been discussed in your podcast is the fear. It's the fear of an employee not able to perform. It's the fear of, is this employee actually sitting behind their computer all day doing the work for me? And it's much more about looking at implementing projects and making sure that the person actually finish a project than actually from 9 to 5 looking at, is this person behind the computer? And if you look at some of the platforms, the gig platforms, there's some lovely tools with these gig platforms, and they calculate the time you're working on with your client. But what they're doing is actually they're taking the corporate focus of your 9 to 5. And for somebody like, for example, I'll take myself with dyslexia. I'm pretty quick, and I've learned to handle it all. But there might be people that, oh my god, 2 hours to finish this task, and it's wonderful if that 2 hours it's the productivity time. But if you want to take it a little bit longer and you're working via this global platform or the gig platform, it actually goes against everything, and it becomes almost discrimination towards the people that are working on their tasks. So there's a few things I think that are impacting this remote world as well.
Indeed. I always find it very strange. Like if somebody, when we are doing time-based payment or time-based work, hourly-based work, you're kind of encouraging people to take the maximum amount of time that they can in order to finish the work, because then they get paid the maximum amount. But instead, if it's results oriented, well, then maybe you get it done in 2 hours and it takes me 8 hours, but we still have the same results. It's like clever for you. It kind of encourages you to do it in the least amount of time. It's like if you finish it in 2 hours, you shouldn't be punished. You should be rewarded that you got it done faster. So yeah, the time-based work does seem like a thing of the past, but it sure is an easy way to calculate, what people are doing. But on the other hand, like what about when I go running and I have a great idea, or I'm just talking with friends and something comes to me, and where do you count that? Like that's also part of the whole equation, that thinking time.
I think too, and I think it's all about changing the mindset of what remote work really is, and it's I think it's influenced by the people with their laptops on the beach, and of course everybody is very effective, but how about looking at actual, the data of these people working remotely, and seeing the efficiency of the people. And I think some of your podcasts talk about that as well. And overall, I think it's going to be very difficult to break this fear from the traditional work. And I think even if we build a bigger movement, I think this is going to be the way it's going to stay for quite some time. And especially if you look at from an HR perspective, how can an HR how can an HR person work online? It's not doable. You're not talking to the people. You should be on the ground. You should be meeting them. You should learn about the problems. So these are the things that my profession walks against, and this has been for years now. Is how can you be productive as a people person, as an HR person working remotely? You can't in many people's eyes. But then again, what am I doing? I'm making a very good living. I have my team all around the world that do exactly the same. So it really is the perception of people.
Yeah, and how do we change that perception? If you're an employee working for a company that does not allow flexibility, what are some of the steps you can take? Not that I'm trying to okay, maybe I am trying to plant a revolution here, but what are some of the steps?
I've been trying a long time.
Okay, what can we do? How do we build trust in these old dinosaur managers that are really afraid of the work not getting done? Because in my experience, and of course I've got a very biased audience, but in my experience, remote workers work too hard. Burnout is sort of the issue. It's not laziness. I'm sure there's lazy ones out there, but I haven't met them.
No, me neither, to be honest. It's they're very, very hardworking people, and because they're dedicated, they're very focused. This is the project or that's the project, and we finish it and we move on to the next one. I think from an employee perspective, in that specific company, if you're looking at a traditional company, well, there's a lot of legislation now in place in the Western world about flexible working. So that's one of the first steps. Well, as an HR person, and I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm not always for flexible working because of various reasons. I don't think sometimes it doesn't add anything, especially using it through the way the legislation is set up. But that's one of the ways in the Western world you can start approaching it, and they have to listen to you. The company, your employee will have to listen to you. The other ways are starting 1 or 2 hours. I can't concentrate at work. Can I please do this work at home? And leave at 3 o'clock and say I work 2 hours. In my own time, to make up for it. That's another way. And that's slowly, and then it becomes 4 hours, it becomes 6 hours. And then, I really need this day to work at home. And this is how you bring it slowly into the company. And it takes months to be able to do this properly. But it is a little bit of creativity requirement.
I love it. So really start slow, dip your toes in and get everybody used to it and show. I think it's like an easy way of building trust, like really small trust deposits that you can leave along the way, that slowly they start to realize that actually you're going remote because you want to be more productive. And like, who doesn't want that on their team? Yeah,
exactly.
So you said that you are not for remote working in some cases. What are some of the reasons why you would advise against it? I can imagine that there's like a culture where it's just not going to work and you can see it when you go in. But before I give all the answers that I think they are, why would you not advise for it?
Well, first of all, if there's certain legislation in place, some legislation in the Western world is so particularly focused on flexible working, work-life balance. I don't particularly believe in a work-life balance. It's a career lifestyle you'll build up, because our generations will be working above their 70s, 80s, and 90s probably. So we're looking at it from a different perspective of how the world is being created now. Then what you mentioned in terms of certain countries is just not doable. possibly they will move on quicker once they open up to it, but at the moment it's relatively difficult. And I'm talking some of the Middle Eastern countries, possibly some parts of Asia. It's just at the moment not in the focus of companies, and companies don't want to work with remote workers. It's very clear.
Okay.
And then I think it's individuals. A lot of people are not cut out to be a remote work, and I don't mean that any disrespect, but it can be pretty lonely. You need to be able to motivate yourself every day. And I mean, when I say every day, it's every day. And if you don't have that in yourself, and if you're like to be constantly around people, you might not always be the right person to work 100% remotely. You may be able to do a number of days, but the 100% remote work requires a certain mindset as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I remember when my husband first went remote, and he hated it. He hated sitting at home alone. I mean, he was very self-motivated, but he just needed to be around people. And so he rented an office so that his team could get together. And of course, they're allowed to work remotely when they want to. Otherwise, I'd have to divorce him. But he does really like being around the people. And a lot of people have said that to me. So yeah, there's something to that. I always say people should work where they're most productive. Like wherever if it's in the office, then great, it's in the office. But I love that people have the choice. So we're getting to the end of the time. I'm always going over, but this is very interesting. But I want to ask you about your online courses that you offer. There's one that's called Essential Guide to Managing the WW Workforce. I don't know if I pronounced that as it was intended, but you have some great online courses. What are those about?
I wanted to just build some basic courses around certain topics. And the one you just mentioned, the Worldwide Workforce one, is the Essential Guide. And it helps employers, traditional employers, but also possibly those looking to start remote working, go through a certain process of how do we start from an HR perspective. And that's what I really wanted to give out in the world, and help people to understand that there's different ways of working remotely. It doesn't need to be one particular way. It's what you mentioned, where are you most productive, and whether that's 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or working 7 days a week and taking a whole week off. It doesn't matter as long as you finish up your work. And that's really going through this course really goes through that process of what systems do we use, or what are some of the freelance management systems that we can use, as well as what are the things you walk against when trying to work remotely.
You mentioned freelance management systems. Are there a lot of those out there where you can see what people are doing, recording their time? Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, and they take over the whole. So instead of a HRS system, so a HR software system, these systems, they manage everything from taxation, payroll, to employee records, these types of things, but from a data security perspective as well. So if you're working with a variety of independent contractors and freelancers, this might really suit you in terms of managing your workforce, and it becomes a legal perspective then, covering certain aspects as well. And there's more and more there's more and more on the market actually.
I can imagine.
But now it's pretty opening up the market for that.
Yeah, I can imagine that there's a whole new world in terms of needing that. And I can imagine, I mean, it's pretty complicated, the tax system, I'm assuming. If you're a company in Asia and you're working with people in Saudi Arabia and the US, and everybody has to take care of their own taxes. Yeah, I can imagine that that's a pretty complicated process.
Well, I mean, they all take, independent contractors are responsible for their own taxation and reporting their own results. However, governments are looking at that aspect, and this is one of the things, it's going to be very interesting for the financial sector and the financial listeners, because there will be a lot of experts needed once governments start saying to online businesses, well, where do you have your workers and where are the independent contractors? And it is coming to, in certain countries, it's coming to the point where some may have to pay pensions. Online businesses have to pay pensions to their freelance workers. So there's various aspects of the remote world. It's freedom. Yes, wonderful. We all want freedom. But there are some countries, especially Western countries, that might not be so happy about, all these wonderful independent contractors living around the world.
I have to say, I had to hire a special accountant just because I'm an American living in the Netherlands, traveling all over the place. I mean, it got really tricky at one point. I had to hire an expert to help me out on this because I didn't want to, you can't go back and say, oops, I didn't know that this law existed. That's not an excuse. So you can't claim ignorance on these things, even though they're really hard to figure it out. So all you freelancers out there, get help and get expertise on this so that you don't get in trouble, because the governments, they mean it. Yeah. These
definitely. Yes, definitely. Especially over the next couple years. Yeah. It'll be harsh on many people, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah. I had some eye-opening experiences myself. I must say, I was glad to have expertise. So Nicole, last question, which is, if people want to learn more about you, what's the best place to get in touch? Where do you send people?
It will be the website, and they can fill in the contact form there. It will be the peopleengine.me. And I look forward to hearing their questions as well, and see how I can share knowledge. I think that's the best way to learn and network in the remote world.
Totally. And it sounds like the services you offer are right on time for this new world of work. Things are exploding. So I hope that you do get some people coming to you with questions. And thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for your knowledge. It was a really enjoyable conversation. And I guess I should have just ended with thank you.
Thank you as well.
All right, everybody, you heard it here. And until next time, be powerful.